Hi, I'm Jim Knotts, President and CEO of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund. Welcome to today's virtual reading of the names. 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the dedication of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. As part of our commemoration, we'll host an in-person reading of the names at the wall from November 7th through 10th, 2022, when all 58,281 names on the wall will be read aloud. In the lead up to that event, we'll be reading names each day online while sharing the photos of these heroes. For our daily virtual reading, the names of the service members will be read by month and day of death between the years 1956 and 1975 in alphabetical order for the given day. We apologize in advance for any mispronunciations. Know that our readers are doing their best to honor these service members. We hope you'll listen and watch each day and share with others as we remember and honor those who gave their lives during the Vietnam War.
Barry L. Adam, John Vincent Aiken, Irvin Lewis Alman, Charles Oakes Baker II, D. Bruguera, David Michael Bertram, Paul Bowman Jr., Floyd Lee Bradshaw III, R. B. Bridges Jr., Donald LaVoice Brightman, Robert David Brockman, Joseph Timothy Campbell, Thomas Earl Carney, Robert Howard Carr Jr., Philip Grant Chipchase, James Lee Cheevers, Dennis Michael Chimmel, Larry Gene Clark, Richard Douglas Conklin, Valeriano David Contreras, Dennis Crane, Michael O. Crossan, James Dale Cruz, Douglas Ray Curry, Michael Dennis David, Willie Davis Jr., Woodrow Davis Jr., Joe Robert DeBault, David Jarrell Enman, Edward Charles Fanning, James Charles Ficetti, Richard Lee Fitz Jr., Jerry Forehand, Billy Ray Foster, Ralph Henry Fronick Jr., James Leonard Galkowski, Ronald Ray Garner, Tommy Ray Garton, Curtis Lane Gaynor, Randy Jack Glenn, Carlos M. Gonzalez, Juan Jose Gonzalez, Stephen Mitchell Grant, Clement John Grassi, Kish Lamont Green, Thomas Eston Gregory, Theodore Stephen Griffin, James G. Greiner,
Albert Leonard Gunn, William Francis Gunsett, George Stephen Hodzaga, Thomas Ralph Hammond, Donald Robert Hoyer, Roger Dale Hebert, Robert Lee Henderson, Stephen Michael Henry, Adam Holman Jr., Lonnie Michael Holmes, Arthur James Hoyt, Nathaniel Hubbard, Raymond Hoyt Hudson, Kenneth Richard Huggins, Lawrence Adams Hurd, Stephen Douglas Joyner, David Mitchell Kaufman, Wilhelm Ludwig Kegelvich, Jerry Craig Clute, Henry Kolakowski Jr., Robert Martin Cooner Jr., Gerald Henry Lavoie, Peter Bodo Lehman, Donald Alexander Lahuto, Larry D. Lamaster, Guadalupe Lerma, Henry Leon Little, James William Litzler, Douglas Eugene Long, Robert Francisco Lopez, John Edward Lynch, Walter John Lyons, Francis Bernard Madden Jr., Ronald Manning, Francis Everett Manuel, Kenneth Wayne Martin, Sylvester C. Martinez, Jerry McCarter, Gerald McClintock, Robert Allen McCloskey, Wayne Uland McClung, Johnny Anderso McDaniels, Paul Vincent McHenry, Raymond Neal McIntyre, Richard Joseph Meechan, William Ivan Mercer, Jerry Eugene Metcalf, Calvin M. Minor,
Richard Brian Murphy, Charles Dean Myers Jr., Michael Raymond O'Giles, Billy Dean Petings, John Anthony Penna, Alton Ray Phillips, Frank John Pissell Jr., Randall T. Planchon II, Louis James Purdy, William Gray Ross, Peter Paul Rubio, Floyd H. Russell Jr., Francesco Leo Sampson Jr., Ernesto Sanchez Jr., Willie Purfoy Seamster, Gary Carl Seymour, John Clarence Schimmel, Harold Leon Shattuck Jr., Thomas William Shea, Lawrence William Shea Jr., Norbert Gene Simmons, Charles Daniel Smith, Ben David Snowden, James Allen Souther, Aloysius Spitzker Jr., James Edward Sullinger, John Willard Swanson Jr., Napoleon Enoch Taliaferro, Joseph Edward Tamagnini, Valentino Tois, Jeffrey Allen Tebow, Nathan Thomas, Wilson DaCosta Thomas, Franklin Roosevelt Thorpe, Bruce Townsend, Mark Dennis Tyler, Reginald Bernard Tynes, Oscar Valenzuela Jr., Hubert Clarence Van Pol, Edward Voigt, Jackie Elmore Wallace, James Clarence Wallace, Carl Ray Ward, Donald Lee Wickline Jr., Herbert Wigfall Jr., Frederick Joseph Williams, Robert John Wills, Norman Raymond Wilson, Richard Wilson Jr., Donald Wood, Charles Gordon Woods, Mitchell Blaine Weisel, William Winifred Young Jr.,